we are here to answer your questions about classic minis, about life, about anything. I think we're going to have a really good time tonight.
I always try and say, don't I, that my channel is about getting rid of the black art of working on minis.
For me, getting into minis, it was I had a newer mini. A 2007 was one of the BMW minis. It was a Cooper S, and I found out about classics. I'm like, you know what? That's what I want. That's what I want.
There you are now. Hello, everybody.
Amazing.
How did I get into minis? It's something that just kind of happened from just one really good friend of mine asked me to build them, and I said, yeah, I'm doing nothing this weekend. I'll do that.
Man, it's funny how quickly things can change.
It's awesome to have so much really good fun chat with you all. And
yep, that's the best part. I'd really like to make this a regular thing.
thank you to everybody again, and thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone, and you know the drill. Enjoy those minis.
See you guys on the next one.
Alrighty. Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 3 of Let's Talk Shit. Hey, Paul.
Hello, one and all. Yes, let's talk some more shit. And demonetized.
Yep, just like that. There we go. Well, it was a pleasure talking with you guys. We've been shut down.
Speaking of which,
yes. So just want to give you guys a bit of a disclaimer. As of about 10 minutes ago, we have been given a whole bunch of severe thunderstorm warnings here in Charlotte. I don't think you guys can see out the window behind me, but the storms are blowing, the lights are flickering, and I might be logging off unexpectedly. So if that happens, I do want to apologize. And if the power comes back, we will get the live stream back connected and everything. So you can tune right back in here. But if not, just want to give you guys that disclaimer so you're not like, what the heck? These guys are the worst. Just logging off, leaving us.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, we are the worst anyway, but, you know.
That is true. Dang it, Paul, you're not supposed to tell them.
What he's actually saying is if we get bored halfway through, we're just going to switch off our laptops and pretend like there was a thunderstorm.
Oh, man, it's raining so hard here.
Oh, no, the lights are flickering. Oh, no. How do I know? Sorry, I have to go.
Oh,
I've been shut down. So yes, so that's how it is in America. How it is here in Ireland is the usual. It is raining, lots of rain. For about an hour there,
wet.
It stopped, but it's back raining again now. So yay!
But it doesn't rain inside.
So look, yeah. The one thing you can be guaranteed of, it's going to be hot in South or North America, and it's going to be raining in Ireland.
Yep, I feel like it's a common theme. And then when the winter rolls around, I think we talked about a little bit earlier, we're going to do the flop. It's going to be warmer here, and then you're going to be over there.
Freezing.
6 heaters on you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's all good. Hello, and welcome to everybody in the comments. Great to see you all. Thank you for tuning in.
Hey, Fred. Hey, Mom. Mad Max, welcome.
Hello, Mrs. Gentry. It's good to see you here.
Got Mark. Hey, Mark.
Lovely things in the chat about you.
Oh, yes. My mother is such a wonderful person. And thank you so much for joining. I think my dad's probably on the stream too. So hi, Dad.
Hello, Mr. Gentry.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
So today's episode, as we said, we are going to be talking about the best suspension mods on the Classic Mini, the kind of various different kinds, what we like, what we use or what I use versus what Paul uses and we have used in the past. Before we get started, I actually wanted to just kind of open up the floor to the chat and see what kind of suspension you guys have on your Classic Mini. So maybe share in the chat and let us know what you're using, and we can kind of start off with the most popular one.
Yeah, cool. It'll be nice to see, because it does seem now that, especially anyway in the last 10 years, I've seen this
become much more prevalent that we're seeing loads of different suspension setups, whether it be, new modern rubber cones with, different characteristics, or like what you have, a complete spring conversion, cone to spring conversion, or even high-lows, like, 15 years ago, high-lows were a thing that if you had them, you were the cool person. You'd got the high-lows, and everybody else was cutting their suspension cones with hacksaws and using washers to get the right height.
No way, really?
Yeah, so, that was the thing. Yeah, that was.
I actually thought high-lows were around for quite some time. So am I understanding that it's only been around for about 10, 15 years?
No, high-lows have been pretty much there since the start, but certainly over this side of the pond, anyway, they were too expensive for most kind of, home gamer mini people. A set of high-lows, well, I suppose were, probably $150, whereas a hacksaw and a couple of washers, and you could cut your cone shorter, or when you invariably cut too much off the rear cone because it had a different ratio to the front, well, then you could put washers in and make it back up again.
And shim it back up.
Yeah, because the car, everybody did it. I mean, I think we all did it as teenagers anyway. We were like, the book says, I'm trying to think who it was that we used to, Hill, I think it was, had a book about modify your mini or whatever. Or maybe it was like one of the magazines or something. And they'd be like, cut a 1/4 inch off the front or a 1/2 inch off the front and a 1/4 inch off the back, or, some real specific measurements like that. But everybody was like, I'm going to cut a 1/2 inch off because I want my mini low, like, and then they put the whole thing together, and the mini would just sit in its wheel arches, and they'd be like, ooh.
Yeah, with the drive shaft at like a terrible angle and CV joints getting absolutely demolished.
They'd try and drive down the road, and they'd hear the back wheels just rubbing in the arches, okay, some springs required, or some washers required. Yeah.
I've actually experienced that shimmy, or not the shimmy, the scraping in the rear. I used to run my car really low, and I only ran it that way for a short time because of this. But you'd hit a corner, and like you could hear a every time, and you go back there, and the arches are like slightly clearanced, I will say.
Well, actually, I have a funny one on that. I had I ran as a daily a 63 Mark 1 Super Deluxe, but I had done a good bit to it, and I ran it as my daily car. But it had Group 2 wheel arches on it. Oh, I can hear your thunderstorm there now.
Oh, you can hear it in the background?
I heard that crack there. We had the fiberglass Group 2 arches on it, and I think within about the first week of me lowering it, somebody said, you realize that there's holes in your arches, and I was like, holes in my arches?
What are you talking about?
When I looked, you could put your hand right through the arch back out again because the wheel had rubbed like a hole in the arch completely. I thought they were telling me like
self-clearancing. Self-clearancing aerodynamic. That's what it's.
You know the way you heard the rubbing. I didn't hear the rubbing because I had a big Weber sticking through the bulkhead and roaring its head off. So my car could have been demolishing itself from the back forward, and I had no idea.
No idea.
No, I used to arrive at every single event, and it'd take about 2 minutes before I could hear people. What?
Oh yeah, ears ringing.
Yeah. Just hold on a minute.
Just let me I just got here. Just let me chill a minute.
Down, let the ringing stop. Can you hear that? What's that? Yeah.
Well,
so
we've got.
Yeah.
I'm seeing actually a good bit more springs than I expected. But we are seeing cones, high-lows. Interesting. Someone mentioned a dual shock system on the front with cones. That's something I've not seen before. Feels a little more than necessary. Spacks, adjustables. Let's see here. A lot of high-lows. A lot of different things here. Well, why don't we just start with rubber cones and whether they are good, whether they are what you should replace things with, and maybe I'll let you start us off, Paul. What is your opinion on rubber cones?
Well, rubber cones, obviously, because of the world that I swing in with racing cars, and generally speaking, mostly historic race cars, I've had to deal with rubber cones as a regulation. Obviously, you're not allowed to use anything else. So yeah, I got kind of caught in a groove with rubber cones, I suppose, for certainly probably a good number of years, where I started to tell myself, or I started to believe that there was nothing else out there, that rubber cones are the only way, and I actually purposely avoided everything else, because I told myself that rubber cones were perfect and there was nothing better than them out there. So that, I suppose, shaped my mind on them for a lot. But rubber cones, I think, as a concept for the period in which they were designed, were absolutely phenomenal. They were revolutionary for our car, and I would probably, I think I could say safely enough that the concept of the Mini probably wouldn't have been possible without them. So, I think they have had that. We have to give them their credit straight away for that, because they are the reason that our Minis are where they are. Secondly, I actually think they're quite underrated. Honestly, I think a very well set up rubber cone suspension is actually phenomenal and has huge merits to it. I mean, some of the merits that I would go off the top of my head straight away with, and I think these are sometimes overlooked, because everybody immediately thinks about suspension performance. And what is suspension performance? Well, one is handling, but another thing is damping. And while we say dampers, and we think of dampers as the things that go up and down and bolt on the outside, well, actually, the damper that's not a damper. That is a damper, should I say? But the shock absorber, as we normally call this, is actually the cone. It's the rubber cone. So, rubber as a material is fantastic at absorbing shock and dampening it as well. So, I'm inclined to say that I really think that, I think they're underrated, and I think they carry with themselves some huge advantages, which we can kind of compare as we go along when we start talking about springs. One thing I will say, however, is that rubber has one very, I suppose, serious paralyzing feature, and that is that it is very much affected by the path of time, and that is to say that
they wear.
They do, and they don't like weather. So getting hot and cold vastly affects rubber, as we see, across the board. So I think that may be something. I don't know how many people I see out there who have rubber cone suspension, and they say, "Oh, it's terrible. It's bumpy and harsh." And you say, "Well, when's the last time you serviced it? Like, when did it last get a new set of cones?" "Oh, I've never put new cones in it." And you look at the age of the car, and it's 40 years old. You say, "Well, if you've got 40-year-old rubber cones, you might as well have blocks of wood in there." Like,
you might as well have two solid blocks of wood shaped as rubber cones as your suspension.
Totally.
I totally agree with you. I mean, there's that is a common crux of a lot of folks who jump into Minis, and as a first car that they've ever worked on, kind of like the first project car that they've ever had. And cones are very inherently different than springs in their longevity, as you mentioned. But a good, fresh set of high quality cones are wonderful. Mini Spares actually sells an Evo cone now, which is a kind of fancy way of saying a reproduction of the original quality rubber cones. And the rubber material that they're using on those cones is far superior to the majority of the cones that are on the market. And that's just one example, but Molten, the company that makes smoother ride cones, those are wonderful if that's what you're looking for. And cones can be tailored to whatever driving style you have. I mean, there are super rigid cones you can buy straight from the factory, but you, as you said, you need to service them more regularly. It's not something that you just install in your car and it's good for 2 decades or, even 10 years. Cones need to be replaced more frequently. And that is kind of one of the drawbacks of them. And it's where other replacement systems start to shine, but they also have their pros and cons. I
completely agree.
I think that a set of new high quality cones paired with a set of high-lows is, and your choice of dampers, which we can kind of get into in a little while, is one of the best suspension setups that you can run on a Mini, and probably the most affordable, I would say, at least short term.
That's actually a really, really good point. And again, I suppose this boils back to the original concept of the car. And when we start trying to break down any modification to what is the original standard, the Mini, being a production car for the masses, needed a suspension that was reliably cheap to make and, performing. And I think if you put down on a piece of paper the performance ability of a rubber cone suspension with even the probably bottom of the rung hydraulic damper, you would probably, I don't think it'd be possible to produce any other type of suspension that could match it. I really don't think so. I don't think, but pound for pound, you could get a rubber cone suspension that you could, for the price it costs, say a brand new Mini Spares Evo rubber cone suspension, you put that all together for your Mini with even the bottom of the line damper, as I said, and then try to put one of those other kits beside it. You won't make one for the price, and if you do, it'll absolutely not perform even within 100 miles of the rubber cone suspension. So I think that's probably the crux of everything we'll find out as we continue to go here. It will be a money versus a specific performance enhancement you want, and I think that's where you'll get to. I think that's where where everyone is going to end up getting to when they try and decide what the next step is from the standard rubber cone and damper, I suppose.
Totally agree with that. And this might be a good time to mention, before we get into kind of the newer stuff or the replacement modernized systems that you can put on Mini suspensions, maybe touching on the Hydrolastic suspension, which is, for those of you who don't know, a fluid-based hydraulic system. You had individual fluid dampers that sat where the cones sit, in the front and the rear, and you had these tubes that ran throughout all of the engine bay and down into the dampers, and the hydraulic fluid was pressurized. So when you would go over bumps and things like that, the fluid would become more compressed and then provide that reactionary and dampening, the reboundiness of that you got from cones later on. And that was something that was installed on earlier Minis. It's not something that you see very commonly now as they start to deteriorate, but it was actually a working Hydrolastic suspension was actually a very, very comfortable ride. I would not describe it as a performant ride, though.
No, so the first Hydrolastic suspension Mini I ever drove was a 1275 GT from the very early 70s, 71, I think it was. And yeah, so as Coil says, you've got your Hydrolastic displacers, which replace the cones, and they go front to rear. So basically, the idea is that the dampening happens because obviously the liquid is uncompressible, so you've no compressibility in liquid. So as the bump is transferred from the front to the back of the car, so the energy is dissipated across the car. That's the, I suppose, working theory of Hydrolastic suspension, that any one wheel, well, they worked on the theory that all four wheels weren't going to hit the same bump. That was the theory. So
at the exact same time.
At the same time. So you could displace, which is why they called them displacers, you could displace the energy of the bump across the entirety of the vehicle, which, to be honest with you, was a very solid working theory. And in cars like the MG 1300, I think was incredibly efficient and worked really well. I think the only downside to Hydrolastic in a Mini that I would say is I think the Mini's natural footprint on the ground is a little bit too short for Hydrolastic, and I think it can give this very bobby effect, that sensation that you're waving around a lot, whereas the longer cars with longer wheelbases, that sensation wasn't as apparent because the movement
They
seemed
were
to
so
transfer
long.
slower. Yeah, exactly. So, you know, I suppose it's to do with angle, isn't it? You know, if you've got a little short car and you tip the front, well, if you tip the front of it and then the back of it tips, it's going to happen all very quickly. Whereas, you know, in a longer car, that same movement will feel like less, and it will feel less bobby. But for comfort, I would say that there actually is no suspension setup you could put on a Mini now, be it coil over, be it coil replacement, or any of the rubber dampers that exist. That will be, ooh, that was a
Hang
good
on.
flick
I
of
think
light.
that's just my motion sensor. Yeah, there we go.
All right.
Everything's all right.
I thought you're just getting bored of my Hydrolastic talk, and you're like, this is a good time to fake. Yeah, I'm out of here. Boof. Oh, thunderstorm. See you, folks. Bad topic.
Oops.
Yeah. Oh, is that the yeah. So I genuinely do think that the Hydrolastic suspension for comfort in a Mini was probably some of the best I've ever been in. I was shocked. Now I have to say, the first time I drove one, I remember thinking to myself, wow, this is actually really nice, because the vibration dampening is phenomenal. So road noise and road feel is completely dampened. So it's really isolated from you inside in the car. And I think it just made the Mini feel more luxurious than it inherently is, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that is to say, with the qualifiers of a properly working and either fully restored Hydrolastic suspension in comparison to a brand new, modern suspension, or even a cone suspension, just more modern than the Hydrolastic. A poorly serviced or a poorly working Hydrolastic suspension also is probably one of the least comfortable. It does not fail very well. It doesn't fail like the cones do, where it just becomes more rigid. It just doesn't work as well at all.
No, it basically fails to being completely collapsed, which is not good.
Not ideal.
Yeah. I think the other thing you said about Hydrolastic, which I think is definitely worth noting, is for performance handling, it is pretty much horrendous. That's the kind of fairest thing you can say, because by its design nature, if you turn into a corner hard, it's going to compress the inside wheel, which is going to push up the wheel behind
the other side. Yeah.
Which you just absolutely don't want to happen, because you just make a problem that's already there much, much worse. So yeah. Minis like to understeer, and Hydrolastic Minis have death understeer, I think it'd be the best way to describe it. Some of the cool guys, though, I noticed on a few cars that I got to see over the years that maybe rallied it back in the day, or were performance cars back in the days. There's a guy here in Ireland called Alec Poole that raced a couple of Hydrolastic Minis back in the day, and they used to install shut-off valves in the pipes, so that they would actually stop the liquid going between the front and rear displacers. So it effectively became a no suspension. You could just shut these valves and you had a solid car.
That's wild. I bet it was miserable to drive. Rattle the fillings out of your teeth.
Absolutely. Very stiff, though. It would really turn in. But there's a very good picture. I wish I had it now to put up here. I should have went and looked for it. Of guys in the pits at a circuit race, and there's 4 of them. 2 are standing on the wing, and 2 of them are standing on the door, and somebody is locking off the suspension valve. And obviously the circuit was all right hand in, so they wanted the car a little lower on that side so it would turn in better, or vice versa. I don't know exactly what they were trying to achieve, but they were tweaking the car anyway.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, it was very cool. Yeah, I wish I had that picture to put up, but I'll try and find it for the next live stream.
There's actually a great question that kind of talks that brings up racing, and is what type of suspension? This is from Eduardo. What type of suspension is used the most in racing? So we don't have a lot of mini racing over here, but I am going to make a guess, and then maybe Paul, since you are definitely involved with racing, can give me some school me. I would imagine it's probably rubber cones due to regulations, but also to ease of replacement. That's my guess.
You're pretty much on it. So in every form of racing that I have been involved in, other than rallying, it has been rubber cones, and 90% of that driven by regulation, for period regulation to keep the car as it would have been. But funny enough, the top performing rally cars on the European circuits, the top performing rally minis on the European circuits would all be running a coilover suspension because they would be allowed. And they are doing that for travel, because one of the unfortunate, very inherent downsides to rubber cone suspension is travel is very limited because of the fact that it's a rising rate damper. So the more you compress rubber, the more it fights you to compress it. So you don't get linear compression. So you actually get, it's like a spring that gets harder the more you squeeze it. So for rallying, it's not a good thing. But actually for circuit racing, that's actually a really good thing to have, because having a rising rate spring, there'd be guys trying to design that in the terms of springs for modern race cars, and it just happens to be a natural occurrence with rubber. So it works very well in circuit racing.
Well, that's actually a good segue. The kind of progressive versus linear differences between springs and cones, because as you know, and as some of my viewers know, I run red Coil springs on my car, and that is Coil springs on top of a high-low. Then I still run standard dampers. And I actually have a pretty cool video coming up about a replacement set that I'm putting on here. I'm not going to say too much, but stay tuned for that. And I have been running these springs for many years now. I think almost 5 or 6 years on this set of springs. And I have been I love them. But there is a lot of controversy around springs in general. There's a lot of talk about them coming loose and kind of just jiggling around inside your suspension at full droop. That's like maybe if you went over a speed bump way too fast or hit a really deep bump and the wheel could go all the way down into it. That is one bit of grit that people have shared over the years, and then the concept of spring binding. And so to start off with the full droop issue, a properly installed set of springs using a high-low system and trumpet system that is designed for springs, and coupling it with an oversized bump stop, you should not have issues with full droop. That is the key to installing springs properly, is you have to have those supporting modifications or parts with it in order to make it safe, in my opinion. You could probably get away without them, and a lot of people I'm sure do, but a lot of the folks who have blown out trumpets and blown out rear subframes from springs, it's not because of the springs themselves, it's because they've come loose because they were improperly installed. And I talk about that in my install video that was released 6 years ago. And then I've hit some really serious bumps in my car, and it's never been even a remote concern of mine. And then the other thing,
binding.
Yep. And spring binding really happens when you have not enough room for that spring to compress, and it ends up compressing itself farther than it can. And then the actual integrity of the spring is compromised, and then that is when the spring breaks, and that's when you have these terrible catastrophic failures.
So I suppose that's coming from the incorrect choice of spring. Then obviously they're,
Mhm.
like if they're choosing a spring that's too soft,
Yes.
then it's going to lead to spring buying. But I mean, surely if the spring is, specified for the weight of your car, then you should never. Well, I suppose if you didn't have a proper bump stop, you could bring that in too. So,
Mhm.
I think you're right. I
And
think it's going to be all down to it's a whole package. You can't just take out your cone and put a spring in, basically.
yeah, and that's actually one of the reasons. So there were a few different levels of springs that you could buy over the years, and various different manufacturers had different colors that meant different things. But what I'll speak of is the ones that I work with. 7 Mini Parts sells this kit, and the red springs are the fast road springs. That's pretty much the softest that you can get these days. There used to be a green set of springs or blue, depending on your manufacturer, that were ultra soft. Those are a lot of times the ones that were blown to pieces. And then you have your ultra rigid ones. In Seven's case, they're blue, and other manufacturers might switch that around. But those blue ones are definitely much more rigid and really, in my opinion, aren't suited for the road. They're a little too rough. But great for performance applications.
Cool. Yeah. I have fitted a few of these kits over the years here. The spring conversion kits for a couple of customers I've had over the years, and I'd be inclined to say that one of the things that I have noticed is that there is a huge variation in the quality of those kits depending on where they come from.
Yes.
I don't always know the heritage of parts that's given to me. Obviously, if it comes with a manufacturer's brand, I can tell straight away from that. But sometimes I'll get parts that are just given to me in a cardboard box. And I know we fitted one set here probably about 5 or 6 years ago now. And no matter what I did with that, I could not get a suspension that I was happy with. And
Mm-hmm.
my final take on it, when I eventually took them out and put rubber cones back in, was that the spring itself was just not the right material, or it wasn't the right tension. So I'd be inclined to say that if anybody is thinking of going for that spring setup that you have,
Mm-hmm.
I think there is huge benefits in it, and I think that you can get a really good quality setup from it, but don't buy the cheapest one that you come across.
Yes.
Research very carefully the brand, and know very much that what it is that you're buying is good, because I think you could go down the road, like we kind of mentioned earlier, where you could take actually what is probably a very good, well-working suspension setup and replace it with inferior products that,
Yes.
the
Very
prices
easily.
may look the same. You might say, oh, well, brand new high-lows and, Mountain Smoothoride or Molten Smoothoride cones versus this kit are the same price, so I'll just go for the springs. But actually, I think in most cases, the spring kit that are good, or the better quality spring kits, tend to be a bit more expensive than
Yeah.
a cone alternative.
I definitely agree with that. It really pays to do your research on the springs. I can tell you concretely that the spring setup, and so the spring setup that 7 Mini Parts sells has a spring, a trumpet. This is the full kit, and then the beam for the rear suspension. But then they're all high lows as well, so you have that adjustability. But they are made specifically for this setup, and they are extremely high quality. And I think that other parts resellers have really high quality options as well. If you're not in the U.S., I don't want to make it seem like all the other people are making terrible products or anything like that. But
No,
you'll
absolutely.
find.
I think Mini
Go ahead.
Spares sell a kit that's very good, and I would say it's, from my experience and from how you've talked about the 7 Mini spring setup, I'd say they're comparable. I would say they're probably made to the same standard, because I fitted one or two of those kits in the recent years, and I'll almost say it's been fit and forget, to be honest with you. I just put them in there, spent 5 or 10 minutes setting the car up, and never heard anything about them ever since. So, either the customer binned the car in the first corner, or they've been brilliant ever since. So it's one or the other.
Yeah, either or. It could be anything.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
I do think so. Yeah.
And that's I mean, I think that's probably true even for cones. We were talking about it earlier, and like you buy a good set of rubber cones from mini spares where they're manufacturing to the original spec, and you end up with a great product that lasts you for multiple years until you have to replace it again, which is part of the job. But you buy something that's poor quality, the rubber tears, the ride is gross, that research, it pays to research. I think that's a good takeaway from that too.
I completely agree. Mad Max just asked a question there, and it's a very good point. Anybody who has a hydrolastic suspension car that is going to change to either rubber or cones, you need to watch out for the fact that the hydrolastic suspension has a different leverage ratio than the rubber cone suspension. So you are right, Max. It is different on the wet suspension versus the dry. Funny enough, most racers who race minis on rubber cone suspension much prefer to use the hydrolastic suspension top arm with the rubber cone, because it gives you a stiffer suspension for any given cone you have.
So for someone who is converting maybe I gotta fix this motion sensor, I tell you. There we go.
You keep putting the hair crossways in it, because I keep thinking it's
the storm in the background.
Yeah. You're heightening the energy of this show, I can tell you that.
Yeah, everybody hold your breath.
The next time it doesn't, I'm gonna freeze. I'm gonna just go.
Oh no! But for maybe someone who's converting from a wet suspension to a dry suspension, from hydrolastic to rubber cone, are there some considerations that they need to think about in terms of that leverage? Is there replacement parts, something you might need? Maybe you can help enlighten us.
Yes. I suppose. Actually, I just want to talk very quickly there, because I've seen it pop up once or twice there in the comments, and it's another thing that sometimes is often overlooked. High-lows. There is a load of different kits of high-lows out there, and interestingly, one of the things that you mentioned there about guys commenting on the coil spring conversion that you have blown out trumpets. I have seen a couple of cars that have come to me over the years with, really, really badly damaged high-lows, and that 99.9% of the time comes from their inferior quality high-lows that are out there on the market. So something to be very, very aware of. People asked, what would I recommend for a high-low? And at the moment, my favorite kit is that kit that Mini Spares sell. They're kind of black with their they actually say high-low on them, and they have kind of gold plated fixtures and fittings to put them together.
Yep.
That set is by far my favorite. They are a good bit more expensive than most of the other kits out there, and there is probably one or two other kits out there that are comparable in quality. I think is it Specialist Components or one of those also do a sort of a CNC machined bit. Oh, maybe it's actually MED. Maybe do a sort of CNC billet one, which I imagine would be brilliant. I haven't used it, so I couldn't say, because I always just defer to that Mini Spares high-low. I think 7 Mini Parts sell that same kit as well in the US, don't they? They sell that black.
Yes, they do.
Yeah,
that black, and I believe Mini Spares is actually their supplier for that. I know that they purchase a lot of wholesale stuff from Mini Spares, since we in the US don't have a large mini market, so a lot of it doesn't make sense for us to kind of like, it's time to retool the heritage shell stuff, or something like that. It's like
totally. I wish you would. But
that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Maybe one day.
If you guys retooled and started making shells, we'd probably get them cheaper here in Ireland. So I'd be delighted with that. But anyway, go on.
For LS conversions.
Suddenly the bonnet would be 3 foot longer. You'd be like,
that looks
on here.
It's the Jaguar E-Type conversion.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So that's kind of my 2 pence. Sorry, you did ask me to answer the question there, and it's gone completely in my head. What was it again? You said.
Yeah. So someone who's converting from a wet suspension, a hydrolastic suspension, to a dry cone suspension, do you know of any kind of key things that you'd have to look out for in order to change? Trimming parts, replacing bump stops, those types of things.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So the bump stops on hydrolastic are different. The front bump stops for hydrolastic are they're a massive big bump stop. And they are fine if you were going to use the car for very high performance. But if it was a road going car, you'd need to get rid of those and replace them with the smaller bump stop that actually fits on the subframe. For a Mark 1 type subframe, it would have 2 bolts that go up into the subframe, and they're almost impossible to put the nuts on. And then
miserable,
horrendous. And then for the later cars after that, then they have the single bolt type bump stop. Either of those would be fine. Yes, the arms on the front are different. On the back, there is a difference as well. If you were going from hydrolastic to dry suspension, on the back, there's kind of a couple of big differences, but one would be the actual pin that goes through the radius arm that the hub would mount onto. For hydrolastic, only has a very short little stub axle sticking out, which wouldn't allow you to put in a damper, because hydrolastic cars don't have dampers in the back. They actually just have springs. So you would have to change those pins for pins with actually a bolt on them. The stud, I suppose, that sticks out that you put a nut on to hold it. And
those are pressed in, by the way, too. So in order to replace those, you'll have to have it pressed out and then a new one pressed in.
Very good point. So if you don't have somebody local to you with a press, then you're going to need to get a new arm then with that in it, or else the rear suspension as well, where the cone sits into the subframe, is different on a hydrolastic rear subframe than it is on a dry subframe. So you'd either need to make up something to house the cone, to center the cone, or else you'd have to change your subframe for a dry subframe. So yeah, it's not as straightforward as people make it out to be. There is a couple of good kind of documents about it, but generally speaking, you need to do your homework, do your research before you would go from hydro to dry. The single best way to go from hydro to a dry suspension, however, is a coilover suspension change. And I actually just done that very recently on a car, where we went from a hydro car to coil springs. It was a Mark 2S that the guy wanted.
If you haven't seen that video, he does videos on this. It's very, very interesting. I had never seen a full coil spring conversion done, and very enlightening stuff. So if you haven't seen it, go check out his channel. If you're not watching this on his channel right now.
It is. I tried to do as in-depth a video as I can on it, and I will revisit that video as well in the very near future when that car is back to me, to give a good review on how that has worked out. But we'll talk about them again in a few minutes, I suppose. But I just want to go back there. I see turbomini.com. Phil just put in a comment there, and he's absolutely right. I think the original high-low was made by Ripspeed, and I think they are the ones Mini Spellers are reproducing or making or whatever. So yeah, the Ripspeed high-lows are the business. They are.
Yep.
They're by far.
I see another question here from Miniator. It's around the extended lower ball joints to correct the roll center on lowered minis. And any experience or opinions on these? I have some opinions. I
go on.
Okay, I'll start. One thing to keep in mind with them, regardless of whether the performance impact is worthwhile or not, when they extend that lower ball joint down, they have a tendency to decrease the clearance available to your wheel. And as a result, some smaller 10-inch wheels and even some 12-inch wheels might not clear that lower ball joint. So it's something to keep in mind if you are converting this. Regarding the performance of this, I haven't had enough experience on them to kind of provide an input on that. I'm kind of hoping Paul has.
So yeah, I've actually back-to-back tested them.
Awesome.
On a car that I looked after here, and my personal opinion is that it is completely down to how low you're going to run the car. If you are running the car at anything near what I would say road drivable, in other words, if you for them to become beneficial, this is the way to go with it. For them to become beneficial, the car would have to be so low that I would not fancy your chances driving it on the road. Or if you were scraping you're scraping the subframes off the ground the whole time, because while what they're doing makes perfect sense in a sort of a race application where we're typically running the cars 3 to 4 inches, and when I say 3 to 4 inches, I mean the bottom of the subframe off the ground. It makes perfect sense. Very, very low. In those situations, they make perfect sense because the geometry is such that the arms have ended up going over center. So it makes perfect sense to bring them back down again to a point where their movement is not going to have such an effect on your caster, or your camber, should I say. Whereas, once you go past a certain angle, you start getting this really exaggerated effect on the suspension when the suspension only moves a very short distance. So yeah, you get that roll center effect where the car gets very pitchy and rolly. So I'd be inclined to say yes. On a very low car, there is benefits, but with the caveat of what you said, Cole, that they can cause a lot of problems with clearance, both from the ground and from the wheel. And then secondly, the fact that they really only become beneficial as soon as that bottom arm goes from kind of being flat or down the way to being up the way. That's where you want to look at it. So if your arm is flat or down the way, you've nothing to worry about. Adding more, it really isn't going to be enough. You would make your car handle 100 times better by putting a front anti-roll bar on than you would putting them on.
So you're thinking, if you're going to keep your car at a stock or relatively reasonably high ride height, it would be more beneficial to have an anti-roll bar on the front, maybe on the rear as well, rather than lowering that roll center. You're going to get a similar benefit.
I was kind of saving this till earlier, but I'm going to blast it out now. The single best handling upgrade you will do to any Mini out there is to put a good rear anti-roll bar in it. That literally transforms a Mini, transforms it. So, if you're at the stage where you've done all of that and you're looking for any gain you can have, then yes, things like getting a bit slightly better roll center, yes. But if you're at the stage where one is put a new set of cones in, a set of high-lows, and maybe a decent set of dampers, then your next move after that is trying to stop the car rolling rather than affecting its roll center.
Yes, I'm happy to hear you say that. This has been what I've read, and hearing you resonate that is encouraging, because I have a set of rear anti-roll bar and front anti-roll bar coming from 7 here very soon, and I'm going to be doing a whole install on the car.
I can promise you that you will be blown away at how that will transform the way your Mini will handle. It really will. You'll the first time you go into a decent corner, what you will say to yourself is, "Damn, I lifted off the accelerator way too early." That's what you will. You'll say, I lifted off too early. And then you'll try and accelerate more, and you'll still say, I lifted off too early. And then you'll drive more, and you'll still say you lifted off too early. And that's pretty much, it's pretty much across the board. Anytime I ever fit front and rear anti-roll bars to a car, and the customer comes back and talks to me, if they know how to drive a car, obviously. I mean, if they're just fitting these suspension components because they've got deep pockets and they want nice shiny things, they just go, yeah, it's great. But
Yeah.
if somebody knows how to drive a car and they come back after getting anti-roll bars fitted, that invariably, that's the thing they'll say. I cannot believe how deep I can go into a corner, how far I can accelerate into a corner and how hard I can turn in. And this car just stays level, or it just goes around that corner. So,
well, that is wonderful news, because I have definitely put it through its paces over the years, and I'm by far not the best driver or anything, but I'm hoping that I'll be able to. It sounds like I might notice the difference.
Anti-roll bars will make you look brilliant.
Yes, that's all I care about. I want to look cool.
Yeah. What you have to make sure though is you go out with a load of other people who don't have anti-roll bars, and they'll be like, "Wow, how you?" So when you're in the parking lot of the car meet, you go around and you have that little look underneath everyone's car, and you'll be like, "Okay, I'm gonna follow you, and you can fuck off."
Yeah.
You should go at the front.
Yeah, I'll be at the front, guys. Well, I'll have the turbo too, so hopefully I'll just look so cool. Oh man. Well, with that, I mean, so we are at about an hour now. Why don't we move into our official Q&A segment? What do you think?
Cool. Yeah. Because there's been some really interesting stuff coming in the comments. So yeah.
So just a reminder before we get started, the way we run our Q&A segments is we are going to be just kind of reading questions off of the chat as they come through. We will do our best to answer as many of the questions as we can. In addition to that, if you want to support the stream and support both of our channels, you can choose to add a super chat, and super chat questions are guaranteed answers, and we'll grab those as we're moving through these. So, leave that up to you guys. But with that, let's get started. Do we want to go up in some of these, or maybe we just wait and see what rolls in?
Yeah, what rolls in? I suppose just while we're waiting for a few of those to roll in, I'm going to just touch on dampers a little bit, because it is a very big suspension thing, and it'll just give a minute or two for that to roll in. So dampers is something that I think is hugely underrated in minis. People think I've fitted a damper and that's fine. The difference between a comfortable ride, a performance ride, and an all-out street racer can be a damper. That absolutely can be it. I've had people come in and tell me they want their whole suspension torn out and redone, and I'll say to them, okay, but just let me change the dampers first and then drive it and tell me what you think. And I'll change to a set of dampers that are suitable to their type of driving, and all of a sudden they'll say, did you not tear out the whole suspension and put them back in? Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's something that I've been guilty of myself over the years, of neglecting the performance upgrade of a damper. And it is so, I suppose, effective on a Mini because of the rubber cone suspension. It wouldn't make as big a difference on coils. Now, it still will make a difference. Dampers always make a difference, but it's really apparent on rubber cone suspension because of that rising rate. So a rubber cone suspension, once it's unloaded, wants to literally explode back down to the ground, and that is really the worst thing you can do, because it's going to make your Mini bounce. So yeah, absolutely. So if you've got a really good quality damper that has the ability to let that wheel down very gently, but still let it down in a timely fashion so it gets it back on the ground, that's where you want to be, So I suppose there's 100 different dampers out there available for Minis, so I'm not going to go start and recommending which damper you should go and get. But what I would say to anybody who is choosing a good suspension for their Mini, read up on the dampers out there, go on the forums, go on the internet chats, and just the Facebook pages and whatever, and say, look, I'm thinking of this damper, who has it, and what way does it perform on your car, and get that real good feedback, because you may well find that it's not going to be what you think it is. Yep.
That, or kind of going in with it with a good understanding of where you're going to be driving your Mini. I've had Gaz, you said you weren't going to go through any brands, but I will just kind of mention a couple that I have worked with that I loved my Gaz suspension. I would say that a common misconception with those gas suspension dampers is that a lot of people have bad experiences with them, and it's actually not really the fault of the suspension. From my opinion, it is there are two different types of their dampers: lowered versus standard ride height. And the standard ride height ones are not for a car that has been lowered even millimeters. I'm telling you, if you have any sort of height adjustment on your car, you need to go with the lowered spec. And I would actually say that most of the lowered spec dampers are probably in a similar boat. But the adjustability and kind of focusing on maybe an adjustable damper, if you feel like you have a broad range of driving preferences, maybe you drive in the city most of the time as casual and it's fine. You can turn the dampening down so it's a little bit softer. But then when you're in the mountains or you're hitting the roads pretty hard, you turn up that dampening force and the adjustability is really nice. So I really liked my gas dampers, and I'm going to be installing a new set of dampers here very soon that I'm excited to share with you guys too.
Awesome. I look forward to seeing those going on. Yeah. People often ask me, what do I use? In the last sort of 5 or 6 years, my personal preference has been for the British brand AVO. I've gotten on well with them. They're nice people, and I've used their suspension very well. I know the suspension that you're putting on, so I'm not going to say any more, but I have had really good positive feedback from them too. And I have to say, in a road going Mini, they're brilliant. So you guys got to wait and see his video, because it will, it is definitely one to watch. And they're a really up and coming brand, I hope anyway. And I think they deserve a lot of space in the industry. So be interesting to see how they go. Okay, have we any questions?
Yeah, we've got a few here. One of them is from Rich over at Mini Performance. He says, question, how long before
Rich.
Cole... Yeah, hey, Rich. How long before Cole puts the Mini into a hedge following Paul's egging on with the anti-roll bars? Hopefully that never happens. Rich, my mom is watching this.
Rich, Cole is threatening to come over to Ireland in the future, and we're going to bring him on some B-road hooning here, and we might get him into a ditch at some stage here. All right.
That'll be great.
Well, yeah, but no, he's not going to. No, not going to crash the Mini, and if he does, we won't know anything about it. His channel will just go quiet for about 2 months, and then the Mini will have much shinier paint than it did 3 months previously.
Red now.
Yeah. And a different year.
Oh yeah, it's just a reshell.
Yeah, I had a bit of rust. I had to fix it.
So here's a good one. From Michael, molten smoother ride suspension any good from Mini Sport? I've had experience with them. Have you worked with them before?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What was your?
What are your opinion? Oh no, I'll go. So the molten system was what I put on my car to begin with. My cones were shot, and so I put that on. I will say that it is a very soft and comfortable and very compliant ride, and as a result, you do get more body roll out of those cones than I think I've experienced with other cones. But it was a very comfortable ride. So, there's a trade-off there. How will you drive your car, I think, would decide whether or not you would want something like that.
I have to say, I completely echo your experiences. I've fitted this molten smoother ride a few times, incredibly smooth, very, very relaxed drive, very close, in fact, to the hydro style of suspension. But one thing I will say against them is that their lifespan is incredibly short. Is my experience. Over
that
here,
was the motivation actually for the springs.
Yeah, they stiffen up very quickly, and they don't stiffen up in a nice way. They stiffen up in a very harsh kind of. It's not nice. So if you're somebody who is after a very smooth suspension, they're at a price point where I think it would be fair to say that you could renew them every sort of 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years, maybe. But I would go into the endeavor expecting that, and expecting in sort of 4 years' time to start getting this harshness coming in and being like, I think we're due a new set. I'd be almost, I'd say this is, I'll get shot for saying this now, but I'd be inclined to treat their suspension cones a bit like road going tires on the car. And I'd be inclined to say that by the time you'd been through 2 sets of tires, I'd be probably changing a set of those cones. And that would be how I would tell my own customers to go into the deal.
So what you're saying is it's better for the environment to go with a different set of cones.
That is a brilliant way of saying it. Yes. Because here on our live stream, we are environmentally friendly people, and it would be unfair to the environment to encourage people to go through that amount of suspension cones. So
yes, absolutely. Unless you have a recycling center, then we support it.
Then we support it. Yeah, or unless they wanted the Smoother Ride people want to just suddenly sponsor our live stream for the next 4 months, where we'll suddenly completely change our opinion and be like, oh, those Smoother Ride cones, they're amazing. They're so good. I actually fit 2 sets to my car.
Double the cone, double the cushion. That actually answers Dude's question. I love the username, just Dude.
Good old Dude.
What's the life expectancy of cones and number of years? I think that most brands, you'll probably start to feel the need to replace them or a difference in your ride around 3.5, 4 years, with 5 to maybe 7 years if you're lucky. In terms of replaceability.
These are the cones that we use in the race cars, and they are actually made by Molten, the same crowd that make the Smoother Ride cone, and we pretty much change these every season, which would be less than 20 hours.
I have a question though. How do you know they're for racing? There's no stripes on them.
So these are an older set, but they typically come with a color on them. So they typically have like a yellow or a red paint dot on here that tells you what they are. But actually, what kind of tells you they're for racing is you can see how high they stand up. So they stand really kind of high, and they've this really kind of sharp appearance here. Whereas if you see a sort of standard cone, it's kind of much more rounded. It's not as sharp up here. And that's kind of how they changed the spring rate, is by the way they changed this profile here,
because that allows it to kind of bulge out more. And
exactly. So you can see
steeper.
It has very little to deal with here, but it has a lot to deal with out here. So you get a kind of, it sits into its suspension nicely and then gets very stiff very quick. But you wouldn't believe the amount of road cars that have come to me with these on and been like, oh, I fitted the really high quality suspension cones, and my car is impossible to drive. It breaks my fillings, and you're like, yes, well, you've got race cones in your car. But, I find them uncomfortable driving the car onto the trailer. So, I don't know what your plan is.
People can be so funny with that. The idea. I think there's a misconception around like, okay, I have a standard OEM spec, and here is a fast road spec, and here is a race spec, and here is a rally set, and the rally being the best. And it's not the best, it is the best for that application. And if you are wanting something for the road and you want to go fast road's probably the right choice for you. Having rally spec cones is just going to make you uncomfortable driving the car.
No, totally. Yeah.
Oh, let's see here. What else do we have?
Somebody's watching the match. I see there, Han Mayo. Han Mayo.
Is this a football thing?
There was a football match here in Dublin. Yeah, well, in Ireland. Should I say. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not a football head, so I don't even know who was playing. But I see Mayo come up there, so maybe they were playing. Yeah. I get shot by all the Irish fans now for not knowing who was playing the football. But look where I am. I'm in my garage. I'm not playing football. Minutes ago, I was rummaging through all my stuff to try and find bits of suspension to show you guys.
Yeah, I wish I had some stuff to show and tell as well. I always like having props.
Strip your car. Come on, strip your car, Cole. Come on.
Yeah. Okay. Hang on.
I want to see one of those springs there. Yeah, I'll keep them all busy here while you're popping out with your springs.
Oh, please no. Let's see here. I have a 9. This one is from Geraint. Sorry if I mispronounced that. I have a 1988 Mini Mayfair that has been botched and played about with. What do you suggest I do? A, restore it back to a factory spec. Our standard car is becoming rare. Or B, make my own high-lows, etc. All of the kind of bits and bobs, I'm assuming there.
Yeah, I mean, Mayfair's, as a car, there was quite a lot produced. But, I mean, any car from the, mid to late 80s is getting rare now because they are all rusting and, they're less existent. When people ask me about this, and I get this question actually a lot, should I modify my car or should I put it back to standard? My go-to answer for this is it depends. If you see your car as its monetary value, in other words, you only ever want to spend on your car what you think you're going to get back from it. Well, the way you'll get the most money back from your car is making it as standard as you possibly can, because that's where the value is in buying a car. If I was going out to buy a car, I want to buy as an original car as I can. If you're interested in spending money on your car because you intend on keeping it and you want that car to be something unique to you, then spend all the money you like on changing the suspension and doing an engine and a gearbox and everything else like that. I always find people seem to think that if they spend £10,000 pounds, let's say, on a Mini, that it's now going to be worth what a Mini is plus £10,000 when they go to sell it. But that's not the case, because very rarely does it ever happen that your views align with the buyer's views. And he will see a Mini and say, okay, you spent 10 grand on the engine, but I actually just want a Mini because the wheels are 10 inches in size. And that's why I like Minis. Or I like your Mini because it's got a brown interior. They don't see any value in the engine and gearbox you put in it. In fact, they might actually see that as a negative because it's too noisy or it doesn't drive smoothly, or So yeah, that's, I suppose, the best way I could answer that. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I think I would build on that. And kind of targeting some of the parts that you might be thinking about changing, like suspension parts, your exhaust, manifolds, things like that do have a tangible shelf life. They will reach a point where they don't operate the way they used to anymore. Exhaust rusts out, suspension components degrade, the rubber, the trumpets, the dampers, all of those things are, the word disposable isn't the right word, but conceptually that's what I'm thinking here is you're replacing those is not going to have, from my perspective, a huge impact on the kind of originality of the car. If you want your car to drive nice, put some nice dampers on it, put some rubber cones in there that you like and some high-lows and run it at the ride height you like. The next person who gets it, those are parts that are interchangeable and don't add a lot of originality value to it. But then there are other components like your engine block or your gearbox or, original body panels, things like those. Those are kind of like the key originality factors and the things that you'd want to keep original if you wanted to go that route.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Connor.
Hey, Connor.
Hey, Connor Apple just called in there. Yeah, I ripped out my wet suspension. Mad Max again. I like your YouTube title. Yeah. You ripped out your suspension. You probably did. You keep it? That's the question. If you still have it, then if you're ever going to sell the car and you have that to give with the car, then it probably won't hugely affect its value. If it's in the bin somewhere, then maybe it will.
Yeah, that's one of those things that you I personally, if I was in, had a dirty shell that had old hydrolastic in it, I would probably pull it out, but I would 1,000% keep that. That would go into a hydrolastic box up in my attic, and then if I sold the car, it would be going right with that car.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, and I think that's where you get it. Interesting there, Ballylock Classics. Ian put in a comment there about fitting a strut brace in his Traveller. So vans, Travellers, estates. I've had a conversation with Ian about this before as to the merits of a strut brace. In most in a mini, strut braces are, generally speaking, of no great advantage because the shell itself is so integral to the strut where the suspension sits. There's very little advantage to be had on it. But in something like a van or a Traveller or an estate, that whole section back there doesn't have a bulkhead. So really the only thing that is holding the tops of the shock absorbers is the
roof, really.
The wheel arches and the roof, and that's just some spot welds. So I think in vehicles like that there is definitely an advantage, but I'm not so sure. I think we both just see the same comment.
Yep.
L'Oreal, actually, because I'm working.
Oh. For those of you who don't know what we're responding to right now, Turbo Phil has asked Paul here.
You can figure out what I'm doing there, Phil.
Yeah, we censored it for the live stream. Oh, that's great.
So to finish out on that, I think a strut brace in something like a Traveller or a van or an estate would be definitely a beneficial thing. But I'm not sure.
No. And even with the saloons, even if it didn't have that bulkhead present in the back there, unfortunately, because of the placement of the tank, you are one side of your car is always going to be blocked. So the ability to create a strut brace would require some very custom structuring and value to cost ratio.
Or some significant fuel tank replacement,
re-engineering,
like all our race cars.
Yeah. Your fuel cells and the wheel well, or the wheel thingy in the bottom. Can't remember the name of it.
Fancy fuel cells. Yeah, wheel well. I think that was.
Cool. Let's see here. Here's a good one. This one says, how easy is it to change the cones on your car? Is it a one-day project or a couple? I would say if you have the right tools, it can be done in a day. I would say that if you have the right tools, a cone compressor, and you have a place where you can kind of take some breaks, I think that it's pretty easy to do in a day.
Yeah, I think the usual goes for this. Your own experience with working on minis specifically will have a huge effect because, generally speaking, taking that top arm out on the front can be difficult.
Yes, especially under the radiator.
Yeah, that's a place where a lot of rust festers up there as well because the wheels throw mud and dirt up on that bolt, that nut that sits in there. But look, that is a place where I suppose a bit of time can be taken. As far as getting the cones out and stuff, I know a few people have struggled. I've had a few customers come to me over the years where the tread in the center of the cone, the nut that's welded into the cone,
has degraded.
This guy here, the sort of tread in here, has degraded, and the cone spring compressor that they've been using has just pulled through, and then they've been left in a sort of situation where how can they get this out if they can't compress it to get the cone out, or the tower out, or that component. So if your Mini is your daily driver and you're going to do it, I would be inclined to say I'd start and do the rear first, and then, you know, see how you're going. And if you're halfway through the day, maybe leave it till the next day to do the front, because you could end up with a car out of commission for a couple of days. You know, if something like that goes wrong. But you know,
and the rears are definitely considerably easier to replace.
Yeah, and it's a good place to start. Anyone who ever asks me, I always say, start at the rear, figure it out, and then, you know, when you have your technique down, you know, then you can probably start tackling the front. But the only other effort that I want to put in there is never, ever, ever change one side and not the other. A customer brought a car to me recently that he had done the cones on one side and not on the other, and you know, that turns the car into it's lethal. So if you're going to change in pairs, the two rears or the two fronts, but never a front and a rear and a front and a rear, you know. I suppose
and that's something I've actually, interestingly enough, had a ton of questions in the same vein about running a hybrid cone and spring setup on the car, and that is not something that I would do either. Consistency there's a lot of value in consistency in your suspension. You know, things being aligned properly, things having equal dampening, unless you really, really know what you're doing with the varying dampening forces in different places. Always, as Paul said, do the front and then the rear, or the rear and then the front, but never a side.
Never do. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you get dampening or brakes or really any major suspension structures on a car, they should always be done in pairs and matched pairs, the back and the front, or the front and the back, but never sided. Because you put yourself into really. I missed Connor's question there.
Let me read that here. I'm currently working on fabbing up some brackets for my front subframe. I've removed aluminum tower washers to lower the ride height, cause miglia. Have you got any tips for making said brackets? I've bought myself some 3.5 millimeter steel plate, as I think it'll be better than modifying my original solid mounts.
What are the plates for? Sorry, I'm lost. I got caught up in the Cosmiglia and I've missed it. Is this how you mount the subframe? Is it the subframe mounts he's asking about?
Yeah, the from my understanding, the aluminum tower washers to lower the ride height. And then,
yes.
And then original solid mounts.
Yeah. He's going for mounting the subframe. Yes. If your car, so if you removed the aluminium washers then to lower the car, yes, to the toe board. So really, that bracket is very simple. What you're looking for is just a flat bracket with a piece welded onto the side of it. So in Connor's car, he has one of the later cars that don't have, that are fully rubber mounted subframes. So your car, for example, with the twin bolt subframe is solid mounted all around
on the floor as well. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And his car is one of the later cars. So making up that bracket, to be honest with you, the ones that you can, but you've removed the aluminium tires. Then I think you can just bolt it straight to the floor. Actually, Connor. Sorry, I've gone off on a tangent there, but
so my thought is it pulls it closer to the body, so you can then
So all you need to do is make a spacer, and then you can actually bolt it just straight up to the floor. Yeah. That's what he's talking about. There you go.
Boom, easy peasy.
Sorry about that. that was we went off on a tangent there. Yeah.
Let's see. Richard Cross has a question. My rear valence keeps filling with water, and I can't figure out how or it's getting in. Are there any common areas from where water gets in from? If you have one of those rear valences that have the pockets on the sides, unless those were seam sealed when they were welded from the factory, which I am gonna guess they probably were not. They have seams all the way around them on those edges, and I have seen quite a few cars that have collected water in there and like will just drain out of it. It's quite frustrating.
What I always do on all of those is I drill a hole in the bottom of them, a 6 or an 8 mil hole in the bottom of them, and then I spray them full of one of those good cure rust type stuff, and leave it overnight, and then hit it with Waxall or one of the products for filling cavity wax or one of those, and fill them up with that.
And that those cavity waxes, we don't have those in the U.S. Could you kind of just tell us a little bit about that? Because
okay. So
that's not sold here.
They're a product that is basically a water dispellant, but it comes out of the can in a real vaporized form. So you can spray it in and it will stick to all the surfaces in a chamber, basically. So that's the idea behind it. But I imagine something like, bed liner, that spray you get in a can. I imagine that would work.
I've put that on my car. Yeah.
Yeah, I imagine that would work the same. I'd say it probably is the same thing, just, it's called bed liner in the US and it's cavity wax over here. Now, cavity wax per se is a very specific thing that I think we have over here because it's so wet, or the climate is so wet. But basically what you're looking for is you're looking to cure any rust that's in there, and then you're looking to just coat it with a protection layer so that if it does fill up with water while it's draining out, it's not rusting out the inside of it.
And wax oil, that's something that you would apply over time, maybe multiple times. You apply it, and then after a few years,
it builds up. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. Oh, here's a really good one. We haven't touched on wheel size at all. Jamie says, I'm not sure if this was covered, but is there any benefit from having 10-inch wheels to 12-inch wheels? That is a good question.
So I'll give you my 2 cents on this.
You started.
It all depends on the profile of the tire. So if you have a 10-inch wheel with a 60 or a 70 profile, and you have a 12-inch wheel with a 50 profile, they end up having pretty much the same rolling radius. So does it change the speed or drivability of the car? It changes the drivability, but really doesn't affect the speed that much. It affects the drivability in that a smaller sidewall tire is effectively stiffer and reduces tire roll in corners. So you get a better contact patch. So 12-inch wheels generally tend to have a harsher ride because the wheel has less of an ability to take up bumps, but tends to handle a little bit better and turn in a little bit better, but doesn't tend to overall. Everyone seems to think when they put 12-inch wheels on that it's going to give the car longer legs and make all the gear ratios longer, but the actual rolling radiuses are not hugely different. There's very little in it. Small difference. It's negligible. But that's it. In the US, I presume there's a lot more 12 or a lot more 10 and 13, I'd say. Is there than 12? Is 12 a wheel size you have?
I would say that the majority of minis here probably have 10s on them. And when I do see larger wheels, I think that they're usually like the sports pack wheels, which those are
13s.
Those were 13s, and so those are the 2 common sizes. I don't see 12s very often. One thing though to think about is a 10-inch wheel. From my understanding, and maybe you can correct me on this, the 10-inch wheel is going to be a little bit harder on your wheel bearing over time than a 12-inch wheel would be. Although with the comment about the rolling radius, maybe that is a misconception I have read over the years.
Okay, is it that the harder on the wheel bearing because it's going to spin more? Basically, is it?
That was my understanding. Yeah.
As I said, it would depend on the rolling radius. If you had a very low profile 10-inch wheel, some Hoosier tires and a few brands like that, they'll do like a 60 profile 10-inch tire, and that maybe would be the case because it would be harder on your engine too, because you're going to be revving higher all the time in any one gear. The same speed. But by and large, what I've seen with 12-inch wheels, I think it would make a huge difference between 10 and 13s. So the sports pack, the 13-inch sports pack. But believe it or not, 13-inch sport packs tend to be harder on wheel bearings because the tire, where the load is on the tire, is much further out from the center of the wheel bearing. So you've got a leverage action.
That leverage, yeah,
absolutely.
that makes a lot of sense.
So generally speaking, anybody who's running the big 13-inch wheels tend to have to use the really good Timken wheel bearing, or they struggle with wheel bearing wear or whatever. But it is an interesting question. I think there's a good few misconceptions about it. We might have to revisit wheels at some stage for a bit
I think
more.
that would be a valuable topic for sure. Yeah. It is funny, we at our local car event, so all the jokes and really just the kind of reality of the US is that we have very, very long expanses of highways or motorways in between our cities. And as a result, when we have local mini meets, we'll drive up to the mountains, and the mountains for me are about 300 miles away, which is about 2.5 hours by the highway. But the result is that if you're driving your mini up there, you're putting a ton of heat and load on your wheel bearings. And every single event we have that is multi-day, we've gotten to the point where we just carry multiple sets of front and rear wheel bearings, and there has not been a single event where we haven't changed a wheel bearing, at least on the side of the road or at the campsite. And usually it's at least 3 or 4 different minis over the course of the weekend. It's quite funny.
Yeah. Obviously, with everything here being such short distances, we tend to not see that so much, but we see it on the race cars all the time. I mean, I would regularly, we would put probably in a typical season where there was 6 events, with 2 races in each event, so 12 races, I suppose, effectively across the season, we would probably do 3 sets of wheel bearings easily over that period of time. Yeah, easily.
But you are putting a ton of strain on those. It's not just driving around the corners at the grocery store. It's not like that. You're hitting these corners at 50, 70 miles an hour. There's a lot of torque on those.
And braking and the grip on the tires we use as well, obviously, that makes such a difference too. So, alrighty.
Well, it looks like things are starting to wind down, and we're actually kind of reaching the bottom of the show here. So if you guys have any other questions that you'd like to ask, pop them into the chat now. Otherwise, we will kind of begin to wrap up for the evening.
Yeah. I think we found some interesting stuff in that one again. And I think there's probably place for to revisit this one again, I think, as well. In fairness, maybe in a couple of months, if we have a guest on the show, maybe we might throw this by 1 or 2 of there's a couple of people coming up that might be interesting to get their experience on suspension anyway. I think it's something that there's a good few people, and we can always ask Phil what product he uses in his hair too.
Yeah, Phil, you didn't want to know what I use in my hair? My hair is considerably more long and luxurious.
Yeah. Do you know what it is? It's all down to lighting, Cole. That's what it is.
Oh, is that what it is?
Lighting. Yeah. I'm busy just trying to hide the spots that are appearing,
Oh, yeah, and I've just got 2 big ones now.
Yeah. I think we all have those. Yes.
Yeah.
That's here to the fore, isn't it?
Let's see here.
What have we got?
Got a few thank yous coming in. Thanks for that, guys. And we do have a question. I think we touched on it at the beginning of the chat. Mad Max is asking any front subframe modifications going wet to dry. I think Paul touched on those towards maybe about 30 minutes ago. Were there any that you felt like you thought of since then?
The kind of 2 ones, obviously, is the bump stops, the different leverage ratio in the top arm, and I don't think, off the top of my head, it's a while since I did a conversion, but I don't think there's anything in where the cone goes in. As far as I know, that's the same on the front subframes. I'm almost certain it is. But if anybody knows differ, stick it there in the chat, in the comments. But yeah, I think the two ones are the bump stop and obviously the other thing is there won't be a damper mount, so you'll need to put a damper mount in up there, and you'll need to probably put a longer bolt through the bottom the top arm for it to take a damper as well. So I suppose that's the
because it used you mentioned before the stabilizing springs rather than a full damper up there.
Yeah, exactly. That's the one.
Let's see. Oh, Eduardo has one. What do you guys think about adjustable lower arms? I can start that one.
Yeah, go for it.
Yes. So I have had adjustable lower arms, and I've had fixed lower arms, and I've had correction fixed lowered arms that will create, based on a correctly set up system here. And I just put that light stay on. Based on a correctly set up front subframe, one that doesn't have any damage to it, it'll add some additional camber, some negative camber to it. My preference is a fixed lower control arm with that negative camber built into it. I don't see a lot of value in having a ton of adjustability on my road car. In a race car, I would definitely want it. Tie rods are a different story, but the lower control arm, I like the fixed at a negative camber. That would be my vote.
Yeah, I kind of would echo what you're saying. I actually oftentimes make them here, or I modify a standard arm. So I buy the bushings from Mini Spares. They have an offset bushing kit they sell, which gives you about a degree of negative camber in the bushing. And then,
that's cool.
Generally speaking, I'll off the hole in the arm as well on a road car, because like that, I generally prefer to have a fixed arm on the bottom for two reasons. Obviously, safety, they're a bit stronger, and secondly, there's so much rubbish thrown up from the road. Those adjustable arms, unless you wash them every time you come in from a day's driving, they become non-adjustable very quickly.
Yeah, very quickly.
Fixed. Yeah.
You got grit in there.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Mini Performance just put in. So the subframe where the cone sits is slightly different. There's a tab, he's saying, that holds the spacer. So you might have to like cut that tab off or do that. But if you give either myself or Coil an email, we'll send you a picture of what it should look like, and you'll surely be able to manage to modify it to suit then anyway.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Any other questions about? Oh, this one's a good one. Are parts and work replacing Moke suspension the same as the sedan? The majority of it is. I've worked on Mokes a few times, and very, very similar across the board. Front subframe is basically the same. The rear is basically the same. Bearings, all of that.
The only epithet I'd add to that is that Mokes tend to be considerably lighter. So if you're choosing suspension components, just to bear in mind that a Moke tends to be quite a bit lighter than a sedan. So you might want softer cones or less damper or whatever. But yeah, I think otherwise they're pretty much the same, aren't they? There's not a whole lot of difference.
Yep.
I would love a Moke, actually.
They're wonderful. It's an experience.
If anyone wants to donate one for to HRE, you know where I am, and for the 2 times a year I'll get to drive it.
They're getting pretty up there in price too now. I mean, they're pretty penny.
Yeah, they are amazingly. I had one here years and years ago, and in Ireland they don't really work, because you pretty much can't use them. But
because it's wet so much.
You have to be very dedicated to a Moke in Ireland. I think is the best way to describe it. But I wish I had it now. But anyway. Yeah.
Well, for those 1 or 2 days.
Yeah, almost as dedicated as you have to be to own a Land Rover. But anyway.
You don't have one of those, do you?
Don't know. I don't know where that came from.
Well,
My
perfect.
neighbor the other day spent 10 minutes telling me how terrible Land Rovers are to walk around the corner and see my
And
Land
there's a Land Rover. You're like,
Uh-huh. Ah, yes, yes. But I have to say, I actually couldn't argue with anything he was saying. He was absolutely right. Like, you know.
No. I mean, people say that stuff about the minis, and they're not entirely wrong.
No. Yeah. Between all of the people I know who have minis, and how many of those people do I know that have working minis on the road? I could probably count them on one hand.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, I'm sitting here.
Yeah. Concurring.
Yeah, I'm sitting here running a mini specific YouTube channel without a running mini. So yeah.
I run a whole mini specific garage here, and I currently do not have a working mini. So
Oh
I don't
man,
know. You'd think it'd turn people away and they'd stop coming to me, wouldn't you?
Yeah, well, it's because you're always working on customer cars. Customers are number
That's what
one.
it is. Totally.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, already.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
I think we'll probably wrap that up here today. I want to thank everybody for joining in on this episode 3 of Let's Talk Shit. I had a really good time with you guys. Hope Paul did as well.
As always, guys, thank you everybody who tunes in. I'm starting to see regular faces appearing over here in the comments, which I really like seeing.
Yes.
So, to all the regulars, thank you very much. And don't worry about being late. That's okay. We're going to send you out a scorecard. I mean, that's happening.
Yeah.
You know, you're getting
and you have failed, but it's not important.
Don't worry about it. It's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. We're like, whose line is it anyway? Where everything's made up and the points don't matter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's all irrelevant anyway. But thanks everybody who tuned in. This one was a bit sooner. We normally have a bit more of a gap between them, but you know, it's all Cole's fault. So I mean, I was
sorry. I'm going out of town here very soon. We're going to Iceland. So yeah.
You know, all the rest of us just work and, you know, have time for our YouTube channel. But, you know, hey, don't worry. Yeah, we are going to be here waiting furtively for you to return from your holiday, Cole, so that we can have another live stream. Maybe I'll have like a secret live stream while you're away in Iceland. Oh, maybe you could live stream us from Iceland. That'd be awesome.
I don't think my wife would be too happy.
Just set you up for that one now.
Just gonna sidestep that.
But so that's the thing. So we'll watch out for the next one. We'll figure out when that's going to be as soon as, you know, Cole comes off his holidays.
He gets off my ass. But yeah, thank you everybody for joining in, and until we see you on the next one, enjoy those minis and motor on.
See you guys on the next one.